Picture the restless waves of a sea where the future of global economics, security, and technology all converge, where the ambitions of great powers crash against ancient rivalries, and the hopes of smaller nations hang in the balance. This is the South China Sea, a body of water that might appear distant on the map, but in reality, it pulses at the very core of Asia's and perhaps the world's most consequential geopolitical gamble. What if I told you that what happens here could ripple through every continent, touching everything from the price of your next smartphone to the security of the food on your table? The story of the South China Sea is not just one of disputed borders. It is the story of our interconnected world, where the clash of history, ambition, and technology shapes the fate of billions. Let's dive into why the South China Sea is one of the most volatile and misunderstood flashpoints on Earth. For generations, its turquoise waters have been plied by fishermen, traders, and navies. But in recent decades, this sea has become a chessboard for power, where national pride, economic survival, and the rules of the international order are all at stake. At the heart of the dispute are overlapping claims by no fewer than 6 governments: China, Vietnam, the Philippines, Malaysia, Brunei, and Taiwan. Each draws lines on the map and backs them up with their own history, legal arguments, and, increasingly, displays of force. The most audacious claim comes from China, which asserts rights to nearly 90% of the South China Sea, outlined by what has become known as the Nine-Dash Line, a sweeping, U-shaped demarcation first officially published in the mid-20th century, but rooted by China in centuries-old maps and maritime traditions. To appreciate the stakes, consider this. Every year, goods worth more than $3 trillion flow through these waters. This makes the South China Sea the artery for nearly 1/3 of all global maritime trade. Oil tankers, container ships, and bulk carriers travel from the Middle East to East Asia, from Australia to Europe, weaving a web of commerce that binds together the world's economies. The South China Sea is also believed to sit atop vast reserves of oil and natural gas. Some estimates suggest as much as 11 billion barrels of oil and more than 190 trillion cubic feet of natural gas beneath its seabed. Beneath the surface swim some of the world's richest fisheries, supporting tens of millions of people and feeding hundreds of millions more in surrounding nations. Given these riches, it is little wonder that every country with a stake in the region is determined to protect its claims. The contest over the South China Sea is not merely about lines on a map. It is about survival, prosperity, and national pride. The question is not only who owns a particular reef or shoal, but who will shape the rules that govern the 21st century. The legal drama reached a dramatic peak in the year 2016, when the Philippines challenged China's expansive claims at an international tribunal in The Hague. In a landmark ruling, the tribunal declared that China's Nine-Dash Line had no legal basis under international law, specifically the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, or UNCLOS. The ruling affirmed the Philippines' rights within its own exclusive economic zone, a 200 nautical mile stretch from its coastline. Yet China dismissed the decision out of hand, refusing to recognize the ruling or change its behavior. As Peter Dutton, a leading maritime law expert, explains, China's rejection of the 2016 arbitral award is not just a legal issue, but a reflection of its broader ambition to reshape the international order in its favor. That ambition is visible in concrete and steel. Over the past decade, China has embarked on a massive campaign of island building, transforming previously submerged reefs and atolls into sprawling military outposts. Runways, radar installations, missile batteries, and deep-water ports now dot the Spratly and Paracel Islands. Satellite images reveal the construction of counter-stealth radar systems on Quarteron Reef and other outposts, granting China unprecedented surveillance over the surrounding waters. The Asia Maritime Transparency Initiative has documented a surge in Chinese survey vessel activity near disputed oil and gas fields, with resource exploration often serving as a pretext for asserting control. But China is not alone in flexing its muscles. Vietnam has poured resources into fortifying its own outposts. The Philippines, after years of diplomatic outreach, has grown increasingly assertive, filing formal protests and seeking new defense partnerships. Malaysia has ramped up naval patrols and deployed additional surveillance aircraft in response to heightened Chinese maritime presence. Even Indonesia, which for years tried to remain neutral, has been drawn into the fray by Chinese incursions near its Natuna Islands and a controversial $10 billion United States infrastructure pact with China. In April of the year 2025, Indonesia and the United States conducted joint military exercises near the Natuna Islands, a clear signal of deepening security ties and American resolve in the region. The United States, for its part, has long cast itself as the guardian of the so-called rules-based order at sea. American warships regularly conduct freedom of navigation operations, FONOPs, sailing through contested waters to challenge what it sees as excessive maritime claims by China and others. To Washington, these missions are about upholding the principle that no single nation can unilaterally control vital sea lanes. To Beijing, they are provocative intrusions, stoking nationalist sentiment, and justifying further buildup. The South China Sea dispute is not merely a contest of navies and coast guards. It is a struggle of narratives and legal arguments. China invokes ancient maps and records of imperial tribute missions, while Vietnam points to centuries of administration over the Paracel and Spratly Islands. The Philippines cites its occupation of certain islands following the Second World War. Brunei and Malaysia stake claims based on their continental shelves, as defined by modern law. The legal backdrop is the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, ratified by more than 160 nations. UNCLOS grants coastal states rights to exclusive economic zones, extending 200 nautical miles from their shores. But the convention also leaves room for ambiguity, especially in semi-enclosed seas like the South China Sea, where the proximity of multiple claimants leads to overlapping EEZs and endless legal wrangling. Meanwhile, every year brings new flashpoints. In July of the year 2025, the Philippines lodged a formal protest after Chinese Coast Guard vessels used high-pressure water cannons against a resupply mission to Second Thomas Shoal. Several Filipino sailors were injured, and the vessel sustained significant damage. In June, Vietnam accused Chinese oil exploration ships of violating its exclusive economic zone near Vanguard Bank, sparking a flurry of diplomatic protests. Malaysia, in May, boosted its naval and aerial patrols, citing rising concerns about China's increasingly assertive posture. These incidents are not isolated. They are part of a broader pattern of so-called gray zone tactics, where China employs maritime militias, often unmarked fishing vessels that operate in coordination with the state, to harass rival claimants, block access to resources, and assert presence without triggering open conflict. The Australian Strategic Policy Institute details how these tactics are coupled with information warfare campaigns and economic coercion, all designed to shift the balance of power incrementally, without crossing the threshold into war. The environmental cost is staggering. Island building has destroyed vast swathes of coral reefs, threatening marine habitats and jeopardizing the livelihoods of millions of fishers. The construction of artificial islands, dredging of sand, and constant naval maneuvers have degraded ecosystems that took millennia to form. According to marine biologists, the loss of biodiversity in the South China Sea could have ripple effects across the entire Pacific, reducing fish stocks and destabilizing food security for countries far beyond the region. The international response has been a patchwork of condemnation, cautious engagement, and growing alarm. The European Union, in December of the year 2024, issued a formal statement condemning unilateral actions that escalate tensions, emphasizing its commitment to freedom of navigation and international law. Australia, itself a maritime power, has called for restraint and greater transparency. The Association of Southeast Asian Nations (ASEAN) has struggled to present a unified front, hamstrung by internal divisions and the need for consensus-based decision-making. As Ian Story of the ISEAS Yusof Ishak Institute notes, ASEAN's internal divisions and its consensus-based process continue to hamper its ability to effectively address the South China Sea dispute. The stakes are growing higher with each passing year. As Carl Thayer of the Australian Defence Force Academy puts it, the increasing frequency of incidents at sea, combined with a lack of effective communication mechanisms, significantly raises the risk of unintended escalation in the South China Sea. Imagine a single miscalculation, a collision between Coast Guard vessels, a misfired warning shot, a misunderstanding during a military drill, spiraling into open conflict. The consequences could be catastrophic. Trillions of dollars in global trade halted, energy supplies disrupted, financial markets in turmoil, and millions of lives upended. The world's fragile supply chains, already strained by recent pandemics and geopolitical shocks, could unravel overnight. So is there any hope for a peaceful solution? Or are we doomed to a future where the South China Sea becomes the next great theater of conflict? Let's examine the three possible scenarios that experts see unfolding in the coming years. First, the most likely path: a prolonged stalemate. In this scenario, tensions simmer just below boiling. China continues to expand its military infrastructure, deploys more advanced surveillance systems, and exerts pressure on other claimants through both overt and covert means. Southeast Asian nations work to strengthen their own defenses and deepen partnerships with outside powers, but struggle to present a united diplomatic front. Skirmishes at sea become more frequent, insurance costs for commercial shipping rise, and investors grow increasingly wary of committing capital to the region. Trade routes remain open, for now, but the specter of crisis looms over every tanker and cargo ship. Second, a more optimistic but challenging outcome: a diplomatic breakthrough. Imagine a world where all parties, China, the United States, ASEAN, and other stakeholders, find the political will to negotiate a binding code of conduct. This agreement could set clear rules of the road for naval encounters, establish joint resource management frameworks, and foster scientific cooperation on issues like fisheries management and disaster response. The economic benefits would be immense: stability, shared growth, and a chance to protect the fragile marine environment for future generations. Yet progress is slow, with negotiations hampered by mistrust, nationalist pressures, and China's reluctance to compromise on core interests. As Ong Kang-yong, former Secretary General of ASEAN, emphasizes, a legally binding code of conduct in the South China Sea is crucial, but negotiations have been slow, and progress remains elusive due to China's reluctance to compromise on key issues. Third, and most alarming, is the specter of outright conflict. This could be triggered by a deliberate act, a blockade, a military strike, or, more likely, by a tragic miscalculation. In such a scenario, major powers like China and the United States could find themselves drawn into confrontation, with devastating consequences for regional and global stability. Trade would grind to a halt, economies would be crippled, millions could be displaced, and the security architecture of the Asia-Pacific region would be shattered. As Carl Thayer warns, the increasing frequency of incidents at sea, combined with a lack of effective communication mechanisms, significantly raises the risk of unintended escalation. For viewers far from these stormy waters, you might wonder, why should I care? The answer is stark. Nearly 1/3 of all the world's trade moves through the South China Sea. Every smartphone, car, television, and pair of sneakers imported from Asia likely spent part of its journey crossing these contested waters. A single day of disruption could send shockwaves through global markets, driving up prices, causing shortages, and undermining economic recovery in countries thousands of miles away. And there is more. The South China Sea is a test case for the international rules-based order, the idea that disputes should be settled by law, not by force. If the world allows might to make right here, what message does that send to other hotspots, from Eastern Europe to the Middle East to the Arctic? The erosion of international norms in one region can embolden revisionist powers elsewhere, undermining decades of progress toward peaceful coexistence. Yet, amid the gloom, there are glimmers of hope. Despite the heated rhetoric, rival claimants have found ways to cooperate on issues of mutual concern. Joint scientific research missions, coordinated search and rescue operations, and even limited fisheries monitoring projects demonstrate that dialogue is possible, even in the most challenging of environments. These small-scale successes can serve as building blocks for greater trust and more ambitious cooperation. International organizations, including the United Nations, the European Union, and ASEAN, continue to press for peaceful solutions. The United States State Department, in January of the year 2025, issued a comprehensive report refuting China's maritime claims, urging all parties to abide by international law. The European Union's calls for restraint and dialogue have been echoed by Australia and Japan, both of which have their own strategic interests in the region. On the economic front, countries like Indonesia are grappling with the trade-off between attracting much-needed investment and safeguarding their sovereignty. The $10 billion United States development deal with China has sparked heated debate in Jakarta, with critics warning of potential erosion of control over the Natuna Islands. Such dilemmas are playing out across the region, highlighting the complexity of balancing economic growth with security and independence. From a broader perspective, the South China Sea is also a crucible for the evolving competition between the United States and China, a contest that extends far beyond warships and oil rigs. It is about technology, data flows, and digital infrastructure. The deployment of advanced radar, surveillance drones, and undersea sensors reflects the growing intersection of military power and technological prowess. In the coming years, control over digital networks and satellite communications may prove just as important as control over reefs and shoals. So where does that leave us? The future of the South China Sea is uncertain, but one thing is clear. What happens here will shape the world's economic and strategic landscape for decades to come. The region's people, fishermen, traders, engineers, and diplomats are caught in the crosscurrents of history and geopolitics, seeking security and prosperity in a rapidly changing world. As we close, let's return to the central question. Can diplomacy and cooperation still prevent disaster? The answer remains yes, but only if all parties summon the courage to put dialogue above force and long-term benefit above short-term gain. The growing pressure from international organizations and regional groupings like ASEAN offers a sliver of hope. Negotiations remain painstakingly slow, but even incremental progress toward a binding code of conduct or new partnerships in scientific research and environmental protection can help build trust where suspicion now reigns. And here's a secret often overlooked. Despite all the bluster, there are already success stories. Instances where rival claimants have worked side by side to monitor fish stocks, share weather data, and conduct joint rescue missions. These may seem like small steps, but they prove that cooperation is possible, even in the shadow of great power competition. The story of the South China Sea is still being written. Will it become a flashpoint for conflict or a laboratory for peace? The answer depends on the choices made in boardrooms and backrooms, on the decks of ships, and in the hearts of leaders and citizens alike. It affects us all, from the ports of Rotterdam to the markets of Manila, from the tech labs of Silicon Valley to the fishing villages of Vietnam. If you found this deep dive illuminating, make sure to subscribe and join the conversation below. What scenario do you think is most likely, and what should the world do next? Share your thoughts. And stay tuned for more explorations into the forces that shape our global future. Together, let's keep